1,000 years ago, a single battle changed the course of our history. Two great armies, one English, one French, collided in a storm of mud, blood and iron. The year was 1066. The battle was Hastings. The fighting was brutal even by medieval standards, and it lasted all day. By the end of it, Harold, England's king, and thousands of her bravest warriors lay dead. The victor was the Duke of Normandy, known as William the Bastard. But how much of what we know about his blood-soaked triumph is true? Most of us think that this is how Harold died, don't we? With an arrow through the eye. But we can't even trust that iconic story. Many historians nowadays think that that's a later invention. An even bigger mystery is where Harold's army fought. Fierce arguments rage over the actual site of the battle, which legend says happened in this very field. Remarkably, no archaeological evidence of the Battle of Hastings has ever been found. But now, Time Team have been given unprecedented access to dig that, the official site, for the very first time. We're going to use cutting-edge technology to investigate the official battlefield and its leading rival.
The detail on that is absolutely amazing.
Because if we can prove once and for all where Hastings was fought,
we've actually got a new battlefield now.
Then we might finally nail the most important question of all. Why did William win and the Bastard become the conqueror? In September 1066, a few thousand soldiers sailed across the English Channel from the tiny French port of Normandy. They landed here at Pevensey in East Sussex. Their goal was the total conquest of England, and they won it with a single crushing battle. Mark, the Battle of Hastings always seems part of our national story, doesn't it? It's probably the only English battle that everyone knows about and can stick a date to.
1066 is the most famous date in English history.
What is so significant about it?
Everything changes with 1066. Harold dies, but it's not just Harold that's removed. The entire aristocracy of Anglo-Saxon England is replaced right down to a very low level. We're talking about thousands of people being removed and replaced by continental newcomers.
Who speak a different language.
Who speak a different language and who start writing a different language, but who also have different ideas in their heads. We have an architectural revolution. We have castles for the first time in English history. These are big changes that take place immediately after the conquest.
The conquest was the vision of one man, Duke William, the ambitious ruler of Normandy, whose victory at Hastings is immortalised in the Bayeux tapestry. William, like most Normans, was descended from the Vikings, Europe's most fearsome raiders. But he was also the distant cousin of England's dying king, Edward the Confessor. So when an English nobleman called Harold Godwinson seized the throne instead of William, it set up a bloody showdown between the two men. Today, a mighty abbey proclaims where the fighting's said to have happened. Legend says the Normans built the high altar exactly where Harold died. Even the town around it is simply called Battle. But from an archaeological point of view, it's as if the fighting never took place at all. Not a single piece of bone, armour or weaponry have ever been found here at the Abbey or down there on the battlefield, which is a bit weird, really, when you consider the scale of the fighting and the number of people who were supposed to have died here. Historians think both sides had about 7,000 men each. But the English army should have been bigger, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. In September 1066, Harold lost a lot of men defeating a Viking army at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in Yorkshire. And he was 200 miles away when William landed at Pevensey. It's a miracle that Harold was able to cobble together as many men as he did on his frantic march south. He knew that William had captured Hastings, which is about 9 miles in that direction. What happened next has been the subject of endless speculation. Most historians think Harold's weary army assembled at a place called Caldbeck Hill, and that they then headed down to a lower ridge where the abbey now stands. But in 2012, military historian John Grean grabbed national headlines with the sensational theory that the English never left Caldbeck Hill. John, all the academics, all the historians, certainly all the shopkeepers of Battle are absolutely convinced that that's where the Battle of Hastings took place, aren't they?
Yes.
But you're not?
No.
What made you smell a rat?
Well, it was when I actually started to climb Caldbeck Hill itself. I realised how difficult the landscape was and how hard it was for the heavily clad armoured soldiers to climb up there. And the early chronicles tell us that the battle was fought in a very steep-sided hill.
So you're saying that this place is a far better match to how it's described in the chronicles than the relatively flat area over there. It's certainly a very commanding height here, isn't it?
It is. And it makes no sense that Harold would abandon a position like this to take up a completely inferior position just about a mile away.
There does seem to me to be a flaw in your argument, though, and it's to do with that abbey. If the battle wasn't over there, why is the abbey, which was supposed to celebrate it, over there rather than where we're standing?
Well, the abbey was built there for an entirely practical reason. When the monks were first asked to build a monastery here, some 4 years after the battle, they would have asked people there, have we got the right spot? Is this where the battle was fought? And they'd say, yes, it was around here. They weren't that bothered whether it was here or necessarily there. So the best place for them to build somewhere where they're going to live and live off the land would be there on that nice hill.
Today, the abbey and the official battlefield belong to English heritage. But if John's right, then thousands of us have been paying to visit the wrong spot. Time Team's been given extraordinary permission to dig the traditional battlefield for the very first time.
This must be kind of an iconic field for you.
Phil Harding is joining leading battlefield archaeologist Glenn Ford. They're going to investigate Battle Abbey's fields, and on the other side of town, Caldbeck Hill. Metal detecting will be the most effective way to cover these two huge sites. At Caldbeck Hill, the team get to work. But at the Abbey, there's a problem. These fields host a huge 1066 reenactment every year. The ground's covered with replica junk, so Glenn's archaeologists need to dig before they can metal detect. Glenn, you have actually investigated this area before, haven't you?
We came out in 2011 to do some pilot work on the site. And most of those signals out there were things that the public had left and stuff the reenactors left. And when they're corroded, an object like that could be from the period of the battle. It could be from 40 years ago. All this modern stuff is in the very top 10 centimetres or so. Yeah. Beneath that, there was a sterile layer.
So if you get rid of all the rubbish on top, then anything under the sterile layer is going to be dateable and presumably much earlier.
Yeah.
So the team get to work to remove all the modern debris in the topsoil. It's not going to be an easy task. 900-year-old battlefield remains are going to be incredibly fragile. The archaeologists need to go slowly and carefully. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
The idea of digging up probably the most famous battle site in British history, you'd never believe that you could get the chance to dig a hole in it.
This is our chance to find the first objects from the Battle of Hastings and clues which might tell us why the Normans won. The Battle of Hastings is the foundation stone of English history, but no archaeological evidence for it has ever been found. Time Team's archaeologists are investigating two sites which claim to be the battlefield. and looking for proof which could reveal why William the Conqueror won. We're confident that something somewhere must have survived, because this battle was notorious for its ferocity. Medieval battles were little more than a bloodthirsty scrum, which was usually over in an hour. But Hastings was off the scale, a brutal test of endurance lasting all day. Modern reenactments can never recreate the true horror of ancient warfare, but they're pretty physical. Phil Harding is at Kelmarsh Hall for Europe's largest historical display. Just like a real battle, not everything survives in one piece.
When you are in a battle, and this is the bit I'm really interested in, what sort of bits that would you expect to lose most frequently?
Well, you do tend to leave teeth behind.
Do you lose them in a reenactment?
I've left teeth behind on the battlefield, yes. These aren't historically correct. I've lost brooches, links out of chainmails, jewellery, silverware, rings, they all go. But I may lose that today, which means that I may drop my scabbard.
If you lost that scabbard,
Yeah.
that is the sort of thing that would get hoovered up after the battle.
You wouldn't leave that behind. If you see that, you're picking it up, you're taking it home and you're trying to repair it.
All weapons, even broken ones, were highly prized, so our team's chances of finding one are incredibly slim. At Hastings, scavengers would have stripped the dead as soon as the fighting finished, leaving behind only small bits of damaged armour. The Bayeux tapestry reveals looters taking anything of value. The tapestry has a remarkable eye for detail. It shows how the two armies fought, the weapons used, even the steep terrain. I'm hoping we can mine it for clues to make up for the lack of archaeology. So I've come to see where the tapestry was made. Not France, as you might expect, but Canterbury, the birthplace of English Christianity. I suppose all of us from childhood love the Bayeux tapestry because it's big and it's bold and it's like a cartoon. But does it have much historical value?
Absolutely. It was made shortly after the Battle of Hastings, and it's a 70-metre long pictorial record. It's unique in Europe of this kind of storytelling.
Scholars like Joanna Lainsmith and Alexandra Makin adore this fragile embroidery. The tapestry is a gigantic piece of Norman propaganda, but it was created by English men and women. Have we any idea who commissioned it?
There are various theories, but the most likely candidate is actually depicted many times on the tapestry himself. It's Bishop Odo, who was William the Conqueror's half-brother.
So he was a fighting bishop?
According to the tapestry, not according to any of the written sources, which is interesting in itself, yes, which is one of the reasons why we think he might have commissioned it.
Because he comes across as a hero?
Yes, exactly so.
From the style of embroidery, it looks as if he commissioned the monks here within Canterbury to design it, and then the design went out to embroiderers who made it.
So this isn't something that would have been farmed out frame by frame to different places?
No, the way it's all being worked and it's being fitted together, no, it was definitely worked within one, possibly two workshops.
Bishop Odo's English workforce infused the tapestry with subtle messages. They show the Saxons as brave and heroic, but we need to handle their creation with care. The artists weren't at the battle, so they sometimes copied drawings to bring the tapestry to life. And large parts were restored in the 19th century, including Harold's famous death scene. We've all grown up with the story that Harold died from an arrow in his eye. But this engraving, made 100 years before the tapestry was repaired, shows a different weapon.
We have a long line here where the arrow is now, which may actually represent a spear, and interestingly, On the ground fabric, around this area here, there are 2 holes where the embroidery was originally, and they kind of line up with that line that you see there.
So originally it wasn't a story about a guy being hit by an arrow, there was a lance or something like that,
Yes.
and that at some later period someone's just kind of neatened it up because of the restoration.
That could be the case, yes.
A discovery like this shows just how little we really know about the battle. Only archaeology can prove where it took place. Time Team is using high-powered metal detectors to investigate 2 potential battlefields. One is a place called Callbeck Hill, and the other is at Battle Abbey. And at the official battlefield, the team has made a major step forward. Site director Glenn Ford has isolated the modern rubbish that's littering Battle Abbey's fields.
You getting much signal out of here?
What we've been taking off with the machine down there, it's still on here. You just listen to this. Every one of those beeps is an object. Coins dropped and ring pulls and all that stuff. But then, when you take that away, listen to that, how quiet that is.
So that confirms that the modern rubbish is just held in the top parts of the plough soil.
That's right.
Once the topsoil's off, Phil and Glenn start to pull out genuine archaeology.
Yet another nail.
Even a rusty agricultural nail can start to look like an arrowhead after a few decades. So some of the more corroded finds are bagged up and sent away for X-ray analysis. For English heritage, our dig is a bit of a risk. The traditional battlefield attracts more than 100,000 visitors every year. But custodian Roy Porter isn't ready to give the public back their money. Not just yet. He's convinced that the abbey stands on the battlefield, because the monks had to go to extraordinary lengths to build it where history says Harold was killed.
If you look around you at this fine 13th century vault, look at the height of the ceiling above your head.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a step into the next room, and you'll see that things change quite dramatically.
Okay. I think I can see at least part of the change already.
Absolutely, the floor level's dropped away, and you're suddenly underneath this magnificent lofty vault, far different to the room we were just standing in.
Totally different.
And a space which actually had a fairly ordinary purpose. There's no intrinsic reason why this room had to be magnificent. We think it was simply the novices' chamber here at Battle Abbey.
Battle's monks followed the rule of St. Benedict, and they used a standard medieval abbey floor plan. But this hill was too small, so they were forced to build into it. And that resulted in this massive, oversized room.
It's bonkers to build an abbey on a steep hillside where you have to go to this length to actually construct the buildings you need, and also a hillside where there's no flushing water to take away all your waste as well. If not the battle, why else?
The monks who lived here also thought this was a terrible place to build an abbey. Or at least that's what they wanted us to believe. I've come to the British Library to delve a little deeper into the history they wrote. This beautifully illustrated chronicle was written more than 100 years after Hastings, and yet it's far more specific than earlier histories which linked the abbey to the battlefield. Historian Laura Ash says we should take it with a pinch of salt.
The claim they make is that the high altar in the abbey is precisely where King Harold's standard, his banner, fell.
Well, that's pretty definite, isn't it?
It's definite, it's very precise, it's just not trustworthy. The writer of this chronicle had an absolute interest in saying that this abbey is the preserver of the Norman claim to the throne, that it was given incredible freedoms and land by King William for this reason, because it was built precisely to commemorate his victory.
The monks claimed that William made a solemn promise to build an abbey on the battlefield if he won at Hastings. It's a fabulous story, which they embellished with the idea that William forced them to build it where the abbey now is.
They say, but there's no water and there's no stone, and he says, I don't care.
Well, that's quite plausible, isn't it? That they're saying we don't want to build the abbey here because it's a bad place to build an abbey, and he says, no, you've got to build it here. Well, why else will they build it there?
Well, so yes, rhetorically, it's really convincing, right up until you get to the next bit, which is where we discover that then, miraculously, they find some stone, and miraculously, they discover that there is a spring, and therefore it turns out to be not quite such a bad site after all.
But there's another, more intriguing source. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is one of the oldest books in the English language and our only Saxon description of the battle. For 1066, the chronicler tells us its original name.
Harold gaderade the Mitchell the Hera, the biggest army he could, and kom him to Janus at dar a haren appeldran. So they came together at the hoary, the grey apple tree.
Oh, so we've got a place name mentioned, or at least described.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's very unclear. So for a long time, people would translate this as a place called Apple something. But now I think people generally believe that there was a tree, perhaps, that people knew of, a vast tree on the site. I mean, what's interesting is that for this chronicler, for all it might be a ritual meeting place, it's also a meeting that wasn't wanted, that England wasn't ready for, and that destroyed it.
No one knows where this mysterious tree once stood. Some historians believe the abbey was built on top of it. But others say the tree marked an ancient meeting place on Caldbeck Hill. And John Grian believes that what the chronicler was trying to tell us is that this is where Harold and William also fought.
Any luck?
Sadly, nothing really so far. Just as we speak, I'm uncovering this sort of random lump of iron, which is fairly typical of the stuff that we're getting out of the field so far. What is it? I don't know. It's a random lump of iron.
It's not a sword blade.
It's not a sword blade, I'm afraid. No. As we move in that direction, closer to where the main action of the battle supposedly happens, we're more likely to find things over there.
It looks like your theory is still alive and kicking for a while.
So where are the remains of this terrible battle which left so many dead? Neither of our two sites is delivering battlefield archaeology, but every step brings us closer to the truth. We're going to bring in the latest technology to help us even the odds. And our hunt for Hastings is about to take a dramatic turn.
If you'd like to see more episodes like this, you can make it happen. Join over 10,000 Patreon members worldwide and see new digs take place and amazing additional extras.
In 1066, an entire English army, some 7,000 men, was wiped out at the Battle of Hastings. Time teams investigating two potential battlefields at the same time. A place called Caldbeck Hill, half a mile from Battle Town Centre, and the traditional site at Battle Abbey. Phil Harding and the team have targeted an old field boundary at the Abbey. It's beginning to deliver some exciting finds which prove that metal objects can survive here for hundreds of years.
What you got there then, Glenn?
Well, it's probably one of the first things we've found that's just got that feel that it's probably medieval.
Yes, but what is it?
That's a difficult question. You get lots of bells used on animals, you get little crotal bells, you get bigger open bells.
Yeah, but the crucial thing is that you said you thought that it was the first thing that might well be medieval. You know, that is a good sign. And Roy, from your point of view, it must be quite a leap of faith to allow us to actually put in a trench across this field boundary. You got any regrets?
No regrets at all. I mean, people often come here and think they're looking at the topography of 1066. They're most emphatically not. And, you know, it's things like this which reflect all the various uses the site's been put to.
More medieval finds soon emerge, like this delicate copper alloy brooch. It's inscribed with the timeless phrase, "Love conquers all." But it's not a military find, and that's not surprising, because it dates to about 100 years after the battle. So I've come to the town museum to investigate a new lead. This rusting lump of iron is an axe head, one of 3 donated to the museum in the 1950s. For decades, this intriguing piece of metal was thought to be a woodcutter's axe, dating from the 9th to the 13th centuries. That is, until it was taken to a historical weapons expert in London, who thought it might just be an Anglo-Saxon battle axe. The axe head's twisted by rust, but its blade is broad and brutal. And its shape is possibly similar to that of a battle axe. According to local legend, it was found about 200 metres from the abbey wall. It is tempting to think it was used by an Anglo-Saxon warrior, isn't it? Maybe it snapped in half and was lost in the fray. But without knowing exactly where it was found and how deep in the ground it was, it's impossible to know, of course, whether it actually is from the Battle of Hastings. What we need is a date. So the museum has allowed us to send the axe away for testing. Scientists at Kiel University in Germany are able to carbon date iron objects by testing traces of wood left over from their manufacture. It's a bit of a gamble because the axe was contaminated with varnish during the 1950s. And a valuable battle axe is not something we'd normally expect to have been left behind on a battlefield. But the Bayeux tapestry does show these vicious two-handed weapons breaking apart in the heat of battle. It would be ironic if the only physical proof for the battle had been sitting on a local museum shelf all along. Hastings matters to a lot of people here. But like all great stories, it can attract apparently quite wild speculation. I'm on my way to check out a third potential site, and to meet a man whose theories just won't go away. Local historian Nick Austin believes that the battle took place in Crowhurst, 2 miles from Battle Abbey and Caldbeck Hill. He's written a book, and his theory has grabbed national headlines. Have you got any evidence for this being the battlefield, or is it just supposition?
There's a lot of evidence. In fact, my case relies completely on all the documents written at the time, together with archaeology at the bottom of this field. When you take the documents, you realise that when applied to this site, the topography is specific, and it allows you to understand completely everything that went on in the battle.
Nick's quest began more than 20 years ago with a vision. He's also tried dowsing, which he says has revealed traces of a Turkish-style crossbow used in the battle.
You see the guys with the crossbows in the bottom section of the tapestry, and you look carefully at them, and you'll see that these aren't Frenchmen. They've got big noses and skirts. These are Turks. I'm quite sure of it. And so we're being given the clues, but we've ignored them.
It's the first time I've ever heard that theory that there were Turks at the Battle of Hastings. Nick's been a constant thorn in the side of the archaeological establishment, who, he says, are turning a blind eye to the truth. He's adamant that there's extensive archaeology in Crowhurst and the nearby area. So we've asked weapons specialist Tom Richardson to look at 2 finds, which Nick thinks could be a couple of Norman helmet rims.
Thanks very much.
Now, why do you think that that is a Norman helmet?
It basically has 2 holes in it. What we know is that the very early constructions had 3 holes. They had 2 on the side and 1 at the top. The way I see these helmets constructed was a single piece of sheet hammered into place as a cone, and then this was effectively whacked over the top with the nose guard on.
Where do you think the nose piece might have fitted?
There's a little dent here, on here, which clearly suggested that something like a clip was simply pushed over the top.
Tom, you've had 3 or 4 minutes to look at it. What's your feeling?
Well, my feeling is, to start with, it's very, very light. Now, most armour's thinner than you expect it to be, but this is incredibly thin and light. This isn't protection. This is really rather feeble. I don't buy the idea of a very, very thin iron strip being hammered over the top of a one-piece helm which has been forged superbly. And the idea of a little nasal that was a little clip-on spring clip nasal, that if you hit it with a hammer, it would just bash back into your face, would be neither use nor ornament.
What would be your gut feeling that these two things came from?
Well, I don't know. I'd like to talk to a expert on barrel hoops and buckets. My instinct, as someone who's studied armour for a lifetime, is that this isn't.
That does look a bit buckety, doesn't it?
It doesn't. The problem is, if it's a bucket, there's a big hole in it. Because the problem is, it's not something you're going to carry water in.
There's got to be a hole in one end of a bucket.
I'm convinced that the battle didn't happen in Crowhurst if these finds are anything to go on. But I'm beginning to consider the extraordinary possibility that both our candidates are wrong, and that the real battlefield is somewhere else. Our archaeologists still haven't uncovered that elusive piece of chainmail or arrowhead.
We have a strap end from a medieval belt, possibly.
So you do have some medieval finds?
We do. Unfortunately, it's not really from the date of the battle, we don't think. It's probably a couple of centuries later.
So we've asked landscape archaeologists Alex Langlands and Stuart Ainsworth to see if we should be looking for a third potential battlefield. First, they need to reconstruct what East Sussex looked like 900 years ago. This geological model shows that in 1066 many of these hills were effectively islands in a sea of marshland. Red signifies height, and Coolbeck Hill could be seen for miles around. That's significant, because the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us that Harold gathered his army at a prominent landmark, distinguished by an old apple tree.
I think, you know, if we had to arrange a battle between me and you on this landscape, and I wanted somewhere to rally people to come and meet me, I would certainly choose Coldbeck.
So Harold's armies then coming down from the north, if they can see Coldbeck Hill, if they can see a standard there, they know they've got somewhere to aim for.
That's right.
The English surely met at Coolbeck Hill, but the key to controlling this landscape was the road which ran beneath it. In 1066, the Normans were at Hastings, and this track was the only way out.
You wouldn't be going in and out of these big, deep, wet, marshy valleys. That wouldn't be any sense.
This is all very heavy clay as well around here, so if it does get waterlogged, then it's almost impenetrable. It's almost difficult to walk through, let alone ride an army.
You would have to go through battle.
Harold must have chosen battle as the place to stop William from escaping the Hastings Peninsula. But it's difficult to work out exactly where he decided to block the road, because today the area is heavily built up. So I've come here to this old World War II airfield in Essex, where we're about to launch the first ever laser survey of a British battlefield, using a fabulous piece of technology called aerial LiDAR. What exactly is LiDAR?
LiDAR is a mixture of light and radar, effectively. What we have in here is a device that sends out 100,000 flashes of laser light per second. And these flashes of light go down to the surface and come back as a measurement.
How might it help our archaeology?
We can classify what that reflection actually is. Then we can actually remove those buildings and those trees to show pretty much what the ground would have looked like back at that time.
So by having a look at the topography, we might be able to see why the generals, as it were, made the decisions that they did when they did. So will this flight finally reveal the ground on which William and Harold fought and explain why the Normans won? There must be a clue somewhere. In a couple of hours, we could have the answer. High in the skies above East Sussex, Time Team is carrying out the first ever laser survey of a British battlefield. The crew's circling 2 different potential locations where the Battle of Hastings could have been fought. But down below, neither site's looking like a battlefield. The excavation team has dug 3 strips totalling 180 metres across the official battlefield and metal detected more than 30,000 square feet of Caldbeck Hill. We've also X-rayed the most heavily corroded finds. Not a single object is battle-related. This arrow-shaped spike is just a piece of electric cable. But the aircraft's onboard laser will scan the whole town in 3 dimensions, picking up anything bigger than a paving stone. It might allow us to identify the exact bit of ground on which William and Harold chose to fight. So I've met up with historian Mark Morris to try to understand what was going through the minds of the 2 generals.
William's strategy, as far as we can tell in 1066, is he wants to egg Harold on, draw him down from London and bring him to battle. There's a famous scene on the Bayeux tapestry of Normans setting fire to a house from which a woman and child are fleeing. By harrying the landscape, he is being provocative. This is Harold's own lordship before he was king. So he's terrorising Harold's own tenants. Now, Harold can't let that stand.
Is it like 2 men with a lot of hubris? You've got Harold up north, he's just had this great victory over the Vikings. He comes charging down to thump William, and William's landed with a relatively small force, and he knows that he's got to have a go at Harold.
Well, I don't think it's hubris in William's case, because you know, he's got to come over and he has to win. He has to kill Harold. In Harold's case, Harold doesn't need an outright victory. Harold can just wait for the Normans to run out of food. He can engage him and then retire. So I think in Harold's case, it is entirely hubris. I think, you know, he could just settle for a draw, whereas William needs a knockout victory.
So both sides were looking for a fight. But the English scouts on Caldbeck Hill spotted the Normans coming straight for them. Harold had failed if he was hoping to surprise William. So what was his next move?
Wow.
Alex is meeting Alan Larson, who specialises in recreating 11th century warfare.
Hello, Alan.
Hi, Alex.
Nice to meet you. I'll let you get out of that gear there.
The Normans and the Saxons had very different fighting styles.
Shield wall, please, gentlemen.
Shield! Wall! Ah!
The Saxons fought behind what was known as a shield wall, a solid mass of spears, swords and axes honed by fighting the Vikings for more than 200 years.
Of course, this shield wall is more than just a very strong military defence. It's a psychological defence as well. They know that if they hold this wall and they can't be outflanked, they could have still been there on Christmas Day, 1066.
The shield wall worked best on high ground. But at Hastings, this mass of men faced a new type of enemy. A rain of arrows, which heralded heavily armoured Norman cavalry. Individual Saxon warriors caught on their own would have been no match, as Joe, our Saxon huscarl, is about to find out.
How was that for you then, Joe?
Not pleasant.
No. And what did you think, Alan?
Well, what we saw there encapsulated the experience in October 1066.
Right.
You've got the solid, unyielding presence of the huscarls on the ground.
Yeah.
But coming in against that, you've got the mobility and the speed of the Norman cavalry. This can kill. This can lop a horse's head off, but if the blow's misdirected, then he's vulnerable, and that cavalryman can get, as we saw, can get in and around, and he's dead meat.
The Norman cavalry needed good solid ground. The Saxons needed somewhere they could keep their shield wall as tight as possible to hold them off. The aerial laser has scanned the terrain so perfectly, the answer jumps out.
The detail on that is absolutely amazing, Stuart, isn't it?
It is, and you can see here the detail in the buildings, the field patterns.
Fields.
Every lump and bump on the ground itself.
This computer can work out the town's true ground surface.
Now you'll see it disappear.
That is amazing.
Kilometre by kilometre square.
And it reveals that Caldbeck Hill, where the Saxon army gathered, is too big to defend with a shield wall.
I mean, William's forces are highly mobile, so if Harold's perched right up on the top of Caldbeck Hill, William's got the opportunity to ride round him and look for a weak place.
Harold couldn't have held Caldbeck, so his army must have moved somewhere stronger to block the Norman advance. But we can be sure that William wasn't riding down through the Abbey fields. This boggy ground would have been suicidal for his cavalry.
Well, unless William crawled out of the marsh, then it wouldn't make sense, would it?
It would have been foolish for William on this high Telham hill coming down here to then go into the boggy bit and up that slope.
But there's one point which both armies would have made a dash for. This narrow gap is where the road out of the Hastings Peninsula goes up Battle's Hill.
This becomes a critical piece of strategic landscape when you think of William wanting to advance and Harold wanting to defend. He would have had to advance not there, but along this little ridge of high ground to that neck just there. If Harold could concentrate his defensive forces across that ridge there, then he effectively controls the battlefield.
If we're right, then we need to turn the battlefield 90 degrees from the present one. And most of the fighting took place on the edge of today's town. Richard Kemp is a former commander of British forces in Afghanistan, and he thinks this narrow slope is highly strategic.
I think even today, if you were faced with the same situation as Harold was faced with, he didn't have time for what we would today call a deliberate defence, maybe to construct obstacles, put a ditch across the road. You would be looking at what we call a hasty defence, in other words, a very quick laid-down defensive position to receive an enemy that was coming very, very rapidly. And I think you would therefore have to, even today, occupy this very position here with troops and probably make that your strongest point in those circumstances.
So this is what we think happened. Harold, hoping to trap William on the Hastings Peninsula, rushed down to battle. He occupied Caldbeck Hill, where he met up with the rest of his army. But he didn't realise that William was heading straight for him. He then moved to block the narrow pass into battle. If we're right, what you've got to imagine is this. William and his army come up that hill here. Harold and his men have already come from up there, and they throw up a wall of shields all the way across here, but they only have to go as far as here because then that slope falls away. So this is the perfect place for the Battle of Hastings. The Normans must have struggled to dislodge the Saxon shield wall from this narrow gap. Their historian, William of Jumièges, says that the fighting went on until nightfall. This was a hasty, hard-fought battle between two evenly matched sides. But as the English shield wall thinned down, the Norman cavalry punched through, leaving the infantry to finish the job. We're convinced that this location east of the Abbey is where the battle really took place. Intriguingly, this is where legend says the museum axe was found. Our carbon-14 tests have now confirmed that it is very old indeed. We can't give an exact date because the axe has been badly contaminated. But for the first time we can say it was made before 1600. I'd like to think a Saxon warrior did wield it at the Battle of Hastings. English Heritage has welcomed our landscape investigation, which it says confirms the strategic value of the ridge dominated by the abbey. And it wants to look again at how it interprets the battlefield. Historian John Grean, who had championed Callbeck Hill, is now fascinated by our results.
We've actually got a new battlefield now.
90 degrees from the old one.
So it's very intriguing. And let's face it, the original battlefield possibly has been proven by this that it is wrong.
You said that the original site of the battlefield was in the wrong place, and you were right.
Yeah. I'll accept that, Tony.
So why was the abbey built where it is? It's possible that Harold was killed where the altar once stood. The English king could have watched the battle unfold from here. But given what we know about him, an experienced general who picked the right strategic spot, and a man with a bit of an impulsive streak, then I'd lay bets that he was cut down where the fighting was thickest, standing shoulder to shoulder with his household troops, just like their fathers and grandfathers had done. It's a bizarre notion that our last Anglo-Saxon king might have died not over there by the abbey, but on that roundabout. Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.